Hi everyone! Today I'm going to take a look at seeing how we can get a nested ESXi host deployed. If you remember, so far we have this one cluster here that I call layer 0 because it's actual physical, and the idea is we'll get a new cluster deployed here with at least one, but I think we'll actually do two hosts inside, and then eventually we'll get these, or at least some of these, for example, the domain controller migrated inside. The vCenter, if you remember, is on the DR side, so eventually we'll get some nested hosts up here and then get the vCenter moved onto those. So the real question is, how do we get a nested ESXi host up and running? Well, let's go and maybe before we do this, maybe let's go and take a look at the requirements. So I'll post the link to this in the description section, so you can go and take a look. Now, of course, you'll potentially want to adjust this. Remember, these are the minimum hardware requirements here. You can always go and take a look at the compatibility guide. Just keep in mind here, one thing I want to mention is that this is the supported hardware, right? Like it's a supported platform. So you might have hardware that's not on the list, but still works. So even if your CPUs are not on the list, don't despair too much. I would say at least give it a try and see. And it could be that maybe you can't get to version 7, you have to stay at version 6, 7, for example. If you're on an issue like that, leave me a comment in the video here, and maybe we can find some workaround that'll help you get it running anyway. Now, the first thing you see here is it requires a host with at least 2 CPU cores. So I think initially I will set up with just 2 CPU cores, but the more virtual machines you want to run on top of this host, obviously, the more CPU cores you'll want to have. Down here, it mentions the NXXD. This is the no execute or execute disable bit. We'll go and set that up. At least 4 GB of memory. Yeah, that's really the minimum to even do the install. You can tweak some things, but there's no reason to do that since it's nested. And at least 8 GB if you want to run virtual machines. I'll set it up with 8 initially. I'm very thankful to have a lot of memory on this host, so I'll bump this number up quite a lot later on, but in this initial setup, I'll do it with the sort of minimum numbers here. Then we have the hardware virtualization support, Intel VTX or AMD RVI, that has to be enabled. I'll show you there's a checkbox for that. We need 1 or more gigabit Ethernet controllers or faster, so it could be 10, 40, 100. And then we need some storage. Now here it mentions a boot disk of 8 GB, and you might just see the statement and think, oh, okay, great. But notice it says USB or SD. So, and 32 GB for other device types such as HDD, SSD, or NVMe. And it should not be shared. So since this is not going to be USB or SD on this nested, or nested also means virtual ESXi host, in case you didn't realize, I'll be going for the 32 GB, which is not really that much space. And then, of course, it says we want some space where we can store virtual machines. If you remember from the previous video we deployed StarWind. Now, at this point, we didn't actually finalize setting up StarWind. That's completely okay. So for now, we won't add any storage, but later on, we'll finalize the StarWind setup and get it up and running on these virtual hosts. I just wanted to get the virtual host deployed, and then we'll get the StarWind finalized, and then we can start migrating the virtual machines there. So let's close this again and go here and say we want to have a new virtual machine. And yeah, new. Okay, what name should we give this? So we could call it ESXL1 01. And that's probably the name I'm going to go with here. We could also add something with prod in the name, for example, but I think that should be okay. Now, we could actually even go with a different naming scheme here. So I think I might even use the IP range just to keep it a little bit simple. So if we remember, the production network was IP range 2 and the DRZ was 3. So I could call it 202, for example, or we could call it 201. I think I'll probably give it the actual IP.2. So why not go with 202? And then we'll put this in the production site next on this host here. Yeah, so I have to put it on the actual one because I don't have DRS. Don't want any encryption. Pick it here. See the different policies here. I'm not going to go with any of this. Okay, compatibility level, yeah, 7.0 update 1 is fine. Guest OS, okay, so let's take a look here, see if we say other. Do we actually have VMware here? We do, 7 or later. And it says not supported. That's okay, I think we'll be just fine anyway. CPU wise, okay, let's take a look here. So we want 2 CPUs, and how many cores do we want per socket? Well, it says 1 or 2. I think we could emulate a little bit here, but for now I'll just put all of it on 1. We don't want CPU hot blocking, so that's okay. Here we have the hardware virtualization. You remember this requirement, and maybe I closed this page a little bit too fast. If we go back here, remember this hardware virtualization, Intel VTX AMD RVI. This is what this checkbox will give us. It's on the physical host, but what it basically does is it allows this to pass through into the virtual machine. So we can actually get that piece here. What else do we have? Memory. So we wanted to get that to at least 8. New disk, 32 was the minimum. So let's actually select the minimum. Store, yeah, okay, let's make it thin provisions. So it doesn't actually use more space than it has to. I like that. Some shares and so on. That's all good. SCSI controller. So this defaulted to para-virtual, which is great. Least possible performance impact, best possible performance. Network. So we wanted this to be on the production sites. So we'll pick production. VMX 3. That's very good. And we'll probably want to add some more network cards later on, but we don't have to do that right now. We can sort of add them on later, for example, for vMotion or something else. We might want to have separate NICs for that. I know I'll need an extra NIC at least for iSCSI, for example, but we don't have to set those up right now. CD DVD drive, client device, that's okay. So I can mount it up from my local machine. That's okay. And let's see, a video card. Yeah, this is all fine. Anything else here? No, I think this should all be good. Next, finish. Okay, so we have our virtual machine here. Then launch the remote console, open that up. Takes a second. Okay, so I have to actually authenticate here. All right. So if we take a look here, we can see the removable devices and so on. I can't do anything with that yet. That's because it's powered off. So we'll power it on. And of course, now it's going to try and boot and it doesn't work. Now, one thing here, when you click inside, notice I can't move the mouse out. You have to press the Control and Alt buttons, and then it releases the cursor here. That's because we don't have VMware tools inside. So let's go here, removable devices, CD, DVD drive, connect to an ISO file. Go to my downloads. Here we have our VMware vMvisor installer. And from here, you can basically just press this send Control Alt delete to virtual machine. Click inside, and we can see it's already booting now. So you can press enter, you can just wait for this to time out. And then that's basically it. The install process from here will be exactly the same as when we set up that initial physical machine. Okay, so here we go. Press enter. This is exactly like the same process as we had on the physical server. And at this point in time, there's only going to be the one disk. So this is fairly straightforward. We have the keyboard layout. I'll go with you as default again. Mention the usual lab password, F11. get this kicked off. Now this is going to take a little bit of time, so let's go back, and we could even get the next machine up and running. Okay, so let's call it ESXi L1-203, and we'll still put it on the production location, on this host, on the same data store, same compatibility level. Go down to the other, ESXi 7, still 8 gigabytes of memory, 32 gigabytes the disk. Let's go down and say fin again. Check everything else is pretty much the same. Make sure that we move this to the production network. There we go. Next. Finish. And we could even go and edit this machine here just to take a closer look. So we go to VM options. See here, general options. There's not so much to see. Boot options. So one thing I want to point out here, notice that it's set to firmware EFI as opposed to BIOS, and secure boot is already enabled here, which is interesting. That means we can play with the secure boot feature as well. Anyway, let's open the remote console on this one as well. See if it will work. It did. So we'll power this machine on. Get the disk mounted again. Do the restart. Okay, so this is sort of kicking off. Then we can go and find the other window, which is already done. Okay, so we'll go and remove the ISO. Say reboot. So then we have both of these machines running concurrently. And basically the next steps we'll be doing here is to get the networking set up correctly, and then we'll want to start adding them in. So while we wait for this, we could go over here and let's see here. So we will want to set up a new cluster here, and we can call this layer 1 nested. And I'll leave these features off for now. We'll potentially work with that a little bit later on. So the cluster at least is ready for us. Okay, so I'll get this one kicked off because then we can start working with the other one first. Storm, before, punch in the password. Oh, so we forgot something. We forgot to actually get the hardware virtualization enabled. That's very important. So let's actually go and get that fixed. So push up here. I can't say power off. So let's close this. So let's go back to this VM. We didn't install anything yet, so I'll just say power off. So real question is, how do we get this fixed? Well, we have to wait for it to be powered off, then we can edit it. Go back to CPU and remember to put the checkbox from here. Okay. Then we can actually get it started up again. Okay. Wait for the connection. On. Then we can go and mount the ISO again. Do the reboot. Kick that off. Okay, so that means we can go back to the first one. I'll sort of leave this a little bit in the background so I can keep an eye on it. All right, so once we are here at the DC UI, you can press F2, log in. And there's nothing that should be too surprising here. We just have the one network adapter, so that's all good. We don't use any VLANs here. You could potentially go and disable IP version 6 if you want to. We have IP version 4 here. Now we typically will want to set a static IP here. So I'm going to set this as 2.2, and the default gateway is all good. Primary DNS, that's there already. But let's make sure that we actually have it set up correctly. So what was the IP address of that domain controller? We can try and memorize it, or we could just go here. It's always a little sneak trick. Let you see it was .2.101. Go back 2.101, and then we have to put in a DNS name here, and we ideally want this to be what we'll actually be using later on for DNS. So we'll call it ESX layer 1-202 dot Haslund lab. And we have the suffix here. We'll add this in as well. Haslund.lab. There we go. Exit out. It'll tell us it has to restart the management network. That's okay. Right, that should pretty much be what we need to be able to access this for now. But we could also go and make sure that the machine is actually ready here. So if we say iso1.haslund.lab administrator. Yes. And this is ready. So let's get it kicked off so we don't have to wait too much for this. Yep. All right, good stuff. So let's see here, tools, DNS, minimize the server manager window, Haslund.lab. Okay, so we'll want to set up a new A record here. Actually, we'll want to set up a few. So the first one was ESX layer 1, and we wanted to call it. What did we want to call it? We wanted to call it -202. So let's go back. And you see it's populating the domain down here, so you don't have to type .haslund. Then like the name here, then it becomes double down here. And the IP was 192.168.2.2. And we do want a pointer record, so we'll get that created automatically. Done. Then we'll want one for the second one, ESX layer 1-203. Again with the PTR record here at host. Okay, done. And that's pretty much what we need to do here. We can see there's some updates. I actually don't want to deal with the updates right now since we are in progress with something else. So I'll just disconnect from that. Let's see here. So install is done for the second one as well. There's a little misclick there. Let's go and make sure we get this disconnected and then enter to reboot. So while this is rebooting, we can try and see if we're now able to get the first of these two hosts in here. And we can say that was ESX layer 1-202.haslund.lab. And then you have to put in a username. That's root password that we picked during the installation. Now you could click add host here, but I don't have the second host ready yet. So we'll just do them one at a time. And it says, okay, there's some alert here because the thumbprint it's unknown. That makes sense. It's a new host. So you have to click the checkbox, click OK. Next, and finish. And it will start actually getting some agents and things like that deployed. So that could be taking a moment from a console's perspective. We actually won't really see much. You just see it like this, but eventually it'll pop up in here. And the one thing I notice is it's set in maintenance mode, which is okay. Now take a notice here. It says no data stores have been configured. Well, that makes sense because I didn't set up any data stores, right? Because we had just one disk, which is where we installed ESXi. So that's completely as we intended. And the only thing that's really missing right at this very moment is to get this one here to finish the startup. So we can set up the IP address. Yeah. Done. Okay, configure management, IP version 4, set it up here, .3, DNS. We already looked up, that was 101. We might have a second DNS server later on, but we can always populate those again. ESX layer 1 -203.lab. Put in the suffix here as well. Done. We'll have to do AD. So yes, restart the management network. Restarting a management network is nothing dangerous. It doesn't influence the virtual machines that could be running on this host, by the way. So that's not something we have to worry about. Then we can go down here, add host, ESX layer 1 203.haslund.lab. Put in the password. Next. Check the box. Okay. Next. Finish. And it says disconnected, but that's just because it's deploying some vCenter management agent, getting the connection up and running, and so on. And we see they're both in maintenance mode right now. So that's pretty much what we need to get this up and running for now. And then in the next step, we'll get the StarWind appliance up here finished. And then we can start adding that in as storage so we can confirm that we actually have some virtual machines running here. That's it for now. If you didn't subscribe already, please do so you'll get a notification as soon as the next future videos are ready. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. If so, if you could drop a like, that would be fantastic. And I'll see you in the next videos.